So we'll get started with the next panel on international firearms protocols. You know, today, a detective looking for success in solving the murder they have under investigation in London, England, is dependent upon what a police officer in Birmingham, England, or for that matter, Birmingham, Alabama, does or does not do with the gun he or she seizes in a drug raid. This is why the capacity to manage the information inside and outside a gun and the protocols to make that happen must be shared across cities, provinces, and national borders as well. That's what the next panel will speak to. The panel moderator is Mr. Tim Heaney, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Forensic Technology. Tim heads the sales and business development efforts at Forensic Technology. His career spans 25 years, and during this time, he has he's produced successful results in marketing products and services to international government agencies and corporations. And Tim will introduce the next panel. Good luck, sir.
Thanks very much, Pete. I have to raise us a few feet. Sorry, Pete, I couldn't resist. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming from so far, many places around the world to this event. I've had the sincere pleasure of working with so many of you over the past 10 years to help build and evolve your programs with many of my colleagues, and I've seen some amazing successes over the years, and it's a real pleasure that I can share those successes with so many of you. Today I'm going to be moderating the panel on international firearms protocols, and we've gathered a very distinguished group of people here to present to you this morning. It's a very diverse group with different challenges from various parts of the world. This panel is going to talk to you this morning about some of the challenges they've had in building national programs and international programs around firearms issues that often span very complex borders. They'll talk to you about how they overcame some of these challenges. Sometimes when you're starting a program, it can be seen insurmountable that you're going to get past some of these issues. Well, there's a lot of people that have had realized excellent results. And some of them are going to give you some recommendations from their experiences of what they've been able to do in building these programs. So our first presenter I'd like to bring up on stage is Henrik Larsen. You spoke this morning. I won't go completely into his bio again, but he's basically been with the Danish police force since 1989, 20 years of firearms examination expertise, is a member of the IBIN Steering Committee, and a member of the European Firearms Experts. And our next presenter that will be coming on stage is Commissioner David Baines from the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. He's over 35 years experience in policing from the UK. He's a key member of the leadership team for the British Overseas Territory Policing. Commissioner Baines was recently appointed as the president of the Association of Caribbean Chiefs of Police. So he has a tremendous amount of expertise in that market. Our next speaker will be Mr. Yves Quevillon. Yves is a court-certified firearms examiner with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He is currently the program manager for the Canadian Integrated Ballistics Information Network in Ottawa. He's responsible for managing protocols, processes, and integration with various law enforcement agencies that are all partnering on the CYBIN program. The next person up will be Mr. Bill Temple. Bill is a supervisory special agent with ATF and has been with the agency for over 25 years. He is currently the attaché in Ottawa. ATF has many people around the world, and Bill's responsibility is for partnering with the RCMP and other Canadian law enforcement agencies to help combat firearm-related crime. Our next panel member is Paul James. You've seen him already yesterday. Paul, over 30 years law enforcement expertise. He was with the NABIS program for many years. He's also was the chair of ACPO's Criminal Use of Firearms Practitioner Group, and more recently he's a director with Archivist Solutions. The way this panel will work is some of the panel members will actually do presentations, and others I will be asking some questions, and they will be giving responses. So we'll make this very interactive. Our first presenter I'll be speaking to is Mr. Henrik Larsen. The Danish National Police were part of the first international consortium to build a network using IBIS technology between Sweden and Norway. And it's about over 12 years now that this network has been in place. And first question I'd like to ask Henrik is, why did Denmark, Norway, and Sweden first enter into a partnership to purchase IBIS?
It happened all back in 1996 when Scandinavia experienced what would end up be called the Nordic Biker War. There was a showdown between the two largest groups of bikers in Denmark, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos gang. They were fighting each other in all three countries, actually. In the years from 96 to 98, we experienced numerous of killings between those two groups. At some point, they were even shooting into the prisons with the anti-tank missiles to get other gang members in the prisons. At some point, the Minister of Justice in the three countries, they decided that we needed a electronic ballistic investigation system. So we looked, of course, for the IBIS system, and that was the reason for the Scandinavian network.
Thank you. And what were some of the challenges of working together with Sweden and Norway from an operational, security, process, and protocol perspective?
The challenge was, of course, to harmonize the protocols for which firearms to be put into the system. And we, right from the beginning, we formed the user group or administrators groups who worked together on the protocols, so we made sure that the protocols for both Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were the same in IBIS matters.
Can you give a couple of examples in terms of some of the data?
For instance, just as simple as typing in the case ID and the exhibit ID. So we made a code for that, so it was possible to see if it was a right or left twist bullet, and also codes for the caliber, and it was possible to see in the code of the case ID if it's a test file or a case from the open case file.
Did you have any security issues to deal with between the countries?
Not really, because it was a decision made by the politicians and the ministers of justice, so we didn't see any security issues there. And one have to realize that there's been, for many years, open borders between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, so it's not really a problem. We share so many, we almost come from the same cultural background, so it's not really a security problem. We have almost the same laws.
Can you talk about any successes that you realized over this period of time?
Yeah, back in, I think it was 2002, we experienced the first international hit. We found a firearm in Denmark. It was thrown out of a car on the highway coming from Sweden. And when we entered that into IBIS, it turned out that the firearm was used in an armed robbery in the northern part of Sweden, where a clerk in a shop was injured. And that led to the first international hit. What we did, we sent the test files to Sweden, and they made the comparison with their open case file and identified it there. And they run the case in Sweden, and it went perfectly.
Is there anything that you would have done differently after your experiences over the last 12 years?
No, no, not really. Wouldn't be clever of me to say that I will do things differently. No, I think we did quite a good job, actually. What we do between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden is that we have automatic correlation of all evidence put into the system. Of course, you have to consider if you have a large database, that would not be a good idea, because you will get so long results list that your own cases actually will be hidden in those results lists. So if you have a limited database, as we have in both Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, it's a good idea to have automatic correlations all the time.
Thank you. All three countries recently upgraded to the 3D technology. How do you see the future of the Scandinavian network evolving in the next few years?
We were a little ahead of Sweden and Norway. We upgraded in November last year, and I think Sweden and Norway are in the process of doing it now. So we started reacquiring all our open case file into the 3D technology. During that work, we found some hits that were unknown to us within the open case file, because we were not able to see it on the old technology. And I foresee the same thing will happen in both Sweden and Norway, and maybe it will lead to some international hits as well.
Okay. Based on your experience, do you have any general recommendations for our audience, where we have a number of people out here who are planning or in the early stages of building a national or international program?
I think the most important thing is to, right from the beginning, to form a users group. It could be the administrators, and have regular meetings to assure that protocols are the same if you run a big network. Just to make sure that you do it in the same way, actually.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Oh, there it is.
Our next person presenting is Commissioner David Baines. This presentation come up. Commissioner Baines sits in a very strategic part of the world right now, where there's a lot of crime happening, and a very diverse series of islands. And is the presentation there? It's coming up in a second. Well, there's a lot of drug trafficking, a lot of firearms moving through the Caribbean, and he sits on a number of important committees that are trying to combat these crimes. Commissioner Baines?
Good morning, colleagues. First of all, I thought I'd put this chart up. It's the murder rate by region, published by the United Nations, dated 2007. The reason I've chosen that was it was as early as 2007 that the Caribbean region began talking about having an integrated ballistics information network, RIBIN, for the region. A couple of other issues there. It shows Caribbean being at the top of the list in murder rankings. But here's some things that just to hopefully prick the conscience about what's going on. Today, 6 young men will die in the Caribbean, as 6 young men died yesterday in the Caribbean, of gun and gang related. The majority of the guns coming out of the US. The fact that we're sat in Canada is another issue to look at, in that you are 3 times safer of this conference being in Canada than if you were in the US. So there is no defending or shooting your way out of this problem, the risk. And that's not to have a dig at my US colleagues, because nobody has had better support from law enforcement agencies. And indeed, I have not met a US law enforcement officer who has been less than critical of the current unregulated freedom of access to arms that exists in the US, that has been described as supplying to the Caribbean weapons of mass destruction operating in slow motion. Okay. So that's 2007 when we started talking about doing something about it in the region. Within that figure of 30, hide some real hotspots. Jamaica, you'll know about. Interestingly, St. Thomas, one of the tourist specs that's hidden within US stats, in 2010 was the most dangerous island, with 64 murders per 100,000 population. And apologies, there's an error on there, as my colleague from Trinidad pointed out to me. It wasn't 7.1, it was significantly more, but thank you for keeping that those homicide rates less published in this forum. As Tim has just said, we sit between the drug-producing South Americas and the drug-consuming North Americas and the hubs to Western Europe. As the US begins to close down its borders and control some of the violence out of Mexico, we're seeing a shift of firearms dealers coming over to Florida. We've currently got over 4,000 firearms dealers in Florida alone. That is driving a purchase, either legitimately or illegitimately, of firearms that find their way into criminal hands and are coming into the region by two main routes: straightforward illicit smuggling on go-faster boats or criminal planes, or via cargo systems that feed all of our islands across the Caribbean. And often you will see guns being traded for drug commodity or people smuggling. And we see a pattern of guns that emanate out of Florida into the Bahamas, Haiti, Jamaica. And one example that I speak of was that an AK-47 used in a gang violence in Cayman Island, one of the most wealthy islands in the region, was first originated as a Vietnam War trophy, found its way through, used in criminality in Jamaica, and then across to us. I have to pay tribute to Jamaica because they are the most challenged country, but they're also the cutting edge, both in tackling officer corruption, in building firearms capability, and more importantly, reaching out to their satellite islands and offering assistance where they can. Because not only are they dealing with it internally, they're exporting criminality, guns and drugs as part of that criminality to the following islands. Problems that was set up when they recognized the need for RIBIN. Too many islands. There's over 30 nations in the Caribbean. So it's a bit like that moment in the Spartacus movie. Who's going to be in charge of this? And too many hands went up. So there was a decision or a plan to have centers of excellence that were based in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados, the largest of our islands, that would then receive samples, ballistic samples received from neighboring islands, identified by being proximate, ease of access, direct flight zones. So we had direct relationships between them. Then the problem arose as to who could afford it and who couldn't, and the need to secure sponsorship. And I have to say, nobody has a greater sponsorship than the Caribbean, from Canada, from the US, or indeed from the UK. And indeed, to make RIBIN a functioning, capability, or just short of 1.5 million has been given in sponsorship. And so the equipment and capability for us to function existed or was finally agreed in December 2011, and it was put in place. So that's the equipment for us to make it happen. Our problems then begin to how do we take this forward, and how do we get connectivity? And protocols for sharing evidence and information start to create blockers for us. Indeed, on there you'll see centers of excellence. As the plan from 2010 has been overtaken by reality, where countries like Bahamas and Belize, faced with increasing gun crime, have installed centers of excellence and are already operating IBIS within their system. So they've now become additional hubs for us. The idea for us, of course, is we link our scenes, we get better intelligence around drug support networks, and you heard Judith from Jamaica earlier talk about one weapon used in 16 gun incidents, 16 murders. That's actually translating into where roadblocks are taking place in Jamaica, because they're picking the intelligence that these guns are used on a Friday night, and they're traveling between Clarendon and this jurisdiction. And it's literally as precise as that, where when the weapons hasn't been recovered, but crime scenes has connected and given intelligence to give law enforcement the best chance of interdiction, arresting the people with it, and stopping yet further murders. Interesting statistic coming out of Jamaica: on average, a single gun is used in 5 murders. A single gun in 5 murders. So I want to think about that in taking it forward. So part of it is being more effective in addressing smuggling links, It's more cost effective than sending it on a plane from us in the Cayman up to the UK to deal with. We're getting best intelligence and best crime scene connectivity from purchase in the US, use in the Bahamas, criminal use in Jamaica, and then ending up in criminality our. The other issue that needs mentioning is it will bring a consistent standard to evidence delivered in courts. That has been a routine feature where many of our islands, less able, less trained, and less capable of taking the most serious offences to court, are routinely losing cases of the most serious nature. Some of the problems to making it happen: who leads? I'm currently the president of the ACC, Association of Chiefs of Police. There's 24 members in there, so we are pushing to connect and get this working. CARICOM are the lead agency between the sponsors and 12 nations in the region, which include the Centres of Excellence. Politically, who's driving it? Is it CARICOM itself who wants to have terms of reference and an oversight, or is it the donor nation? And as you can imagine, if the US and Canada funded and put this equipment in 2011, January, and it is still not working, a degree of frustration will follow and begin to undermine yet further funding to take this forward. Confidence and commitment: if you don't see results, your sponsors will walk away from it. Who's excluded from this? English. The ACCP is predominantly an English-speaking Caribbean membership. We've got significant membership, and how do we breach and get into the Spanish-speaking to make sure where organised criminals have no such boundaries, we don't create the false one. And also, interestingly, politically, who's not included? So where's Cuba in this debate that is excluded for political reasons in one sense? United Kingdom Overseas Territories do not get funding from the UK, but they don't get funding from US or Canada because they're deemed to get sponsorship from UK. So there's some real gaps in how this works. Timeline. Part of us is to be, if you're going to get sponsorship, define what your plan is, but keep it flexibility, because really it's like herding sheep with 24 different nations. Who's got the capability? Who has the readiness, the commitment, the finances, the political support and demand? So resequence the connectivity of satellite nations to your hubs. Develop a coalition of the willing, get it working, and let public demand drive the political argument and cut through your arguments, because otherwise you will be having the debate of why you cannot connect rather than the simple reason of trying to stop murders on a daily basis, save lives, and improve police enforcement capabilities. And I think that's just what I've said, so that's it.
Okay. Sorry, any questions for Commissioner Baines? And sorry, I didn't ask about any questions for Henrik Larsson? Okay. All right, we'll move on to our next person, and we'll finalize with some questions after. So our next presenter is Yves Cavillon. So he's going to talk to you a bit about the CYBEN program, some of the challenges, successes of this program.
Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. The Canadian Integrated Ballistic Identification System is a partnership between the RCMP, Ontario's Centre of Forensic Science, and the Laboratoire of Sciences Judiciaires and Médecine Légale in Quebec, and also Calgary Police Service, our latest addition. CYBEN also exchanges information with the US, currently on a manual basis, very limited at this time. Our network started in 2002 in Ottawa, then Montreal and Toronto were added in 2004, Halifax, Regina, and Vancouver in 2007, and finally we were happy to have Calgary Police Service join us in 2011. I think it's Pete that said yesterday that when you have a crime, you have to look where it is, the location. In Canada, 90% of our population is concentrated within 160 kilometers of the US border, so Obviously, our priority as far as transnational crime is on the U.S., Canada. Items that are acquired on Cybin, fired bullets and cartridge cases from crime scenes, test-fired bullets and cartridge case from firearms related to criminal investigation that are actually sent into the laboratory, and also suspicious firearms. Now, those are the firearms that Senator White alluded this morning, which are not always sent to the lab. It would be nice to have legislation, as in other countries where it's mandated that all firearms are submitted for IBIS, but it's not the case at this time in Canada. But we encourage investigators to send us any firearm that they have, that they seize, or that are submitted as found. We're currently, this is our criteria in order to keep the database lean, and recovered or found and within the last 2 years, restricted, prohibited, or criminally altered, or otherwise, if it's non-restricted, but if it's known or suspected to have a criminal association, we'll also enter it on Cybin. Some of the statistics to date. Like I said, we started in 2002. Actually, our first hit was about 2004. Since that time, we've entered about 30,000 cases on Cybin. Fortunately, in Canada, we do not have that many. One is too many, but we don't have that many murder by using firearms. 2011, Stats Canada reported 158 homicide with a firearm. Obviously, that's too much, but still the numbers are fairly low. As you can see, we've acquired about over 60,000 items since we started. We've over 3,000 hits with about a percentage of hit, about 5%. I'd like to point out that about 75% of the hits actually come from the Center of Forensic Science in Toronto. So they're very active, they're very good. They actually have an amazing 13% hit rate. So I encourage you to join the workshop this afternoon from Wayne Arenzi on their correlation practice. So some of the challenges that we've had, an opportunity also as well. Of course, evergreening of equipment. As you know, Trax 3D offers much superior performance. So we have actually one heritage unit left to upgrade, which should be done this summer. Another item is the public agent regulation, which is legislation in Canada that offers an opportunity for us to identify firearms that could be entered on IBIS. So with the assistance of the Canadian Firearms Program, we've been trying to leverage that to add some firearms into Cybin. And of course, the pursuit of the establishment of a live connection between Cybin and NIBIN. Now, on that Cybin-NIBIN live connection, we've been working together, the RCMP with ATF, to establish that connection between the two networks. Several challenges have had to be met. In the meantime, we are conducting a limited number of Cybin-NIBIN correlations that are conducted manually with the assistance of forensic technology. So far, no confirmed hits. So we can't wait to have that live connection. Some of the recommendations, I guess, I would propose is to certainly have some of the legislators on your side. What Cybin did, actually, we took advantage of existing cross-border collaboration initiatives, such as the Cross-Border Crime Forum, which was established to address transnational crime between Canada and U.S. Also, there's a Canada-U.S. Firearms Trafficking Working Group, which was established and is co-chaired by the RCMP and the ATF. So actually, one Canadian initiative from that working group is the investments to combat the criminal use of firearms, or ICUF. And this is where Cybin gets its funding. So certainly have the highest level of government possible sign agreement to share ballistic information. And the funding, of course, you have to get. And persistence, I would add that persistence is a virtue as far as connecting. As you can see there, some of the steps that we followed along the way. I'm not going to go through each one of them. What's highlighted in green is done. Number 2 actually was done last week. We finally got final approval for from our security group, which will allow us to also implement number 10, the recurring data replication between both ICSs. So some of the steps that we followed along the way. And I would like to thank Forensic Technology for inviting us today. They're great hosts. I'd like to thank all the partners for CYBIN. And also I'd like to thank the Interpol for, again, co-hosting this symposium. And also I'd like to thank them for officially inviting CYBIN to join IBIN. That's certainly something that we're going to follow up on. So this is my presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, please? Surely somebody's got a question out there. All right. Okay, well, our next presenter is William Temple with ATF. Wait for the slide. Okay. Bill, go ahead, please.
Good morning. As Tim has stated, I am the attaché for ATF here in Canada. Our office is based out of the U.S. Embassy, as well as the Consulate Generals in Toronto and Vancouver. Special Agent Pete Forcelli is with me here at the conference. He's our assistant attaché in Toronto, where the bulk of our firearms tracing is conducted out of. So basically, the mission of the attaché's office is manyfold. As some of the panel members have said, the flow of guns from the United States is it's a sieve. So we basically are working towards stemming the flow of firearms out of the United States into Canada. And how do we do that? Well, we provide investigative assistance to the host country of Canada, as well as domestic offices in the United States by providing back collateral investigations. We share the information that we gather through our intelligence, as well as our investigations with our partners in the Canadian law enforcement community. We facilitate all the tracing of recovered crime guns in Canada through ATF's E-Trace. And then we also serve as a consultant to the U.S. Ambassador and to the Consulate General's office. Some of the challenges that we face here on the almost 6,500-kilometer border of the U.S. Are common interests between U.S. and Canada. But they're not unique to just our country, but probably to many of your countries as well. But it's great to have good neighbors, and that's the key thing. Majority of the border crossings are manned between the United States. Major crossings are manned between the United States and Canada. But some of the areas can be assessed without any hindrance at all. Some of these are found along the border. Basically where the First Nations, American Native Indian reservations are located at. The U.S. also has a number of pipelines, major highways that run north and south, so they facilitate the ease of trafficking of weapons, especially from our source states. The states that you see in yellow, this is a report that's about a year old. We're currently updating the report to reflect the current trends. Fiscal year 2012, our fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 31st. Last year, ATF was responsible for tracing 1,187 weapons here in Canada, and then also generating 50 collateral investigations that went out to 14 of our U.S.-based field divisions. But the pipelines that I'm talking about, the major highways, and anybody that's has vacation in the United States know of probably many of them. I-95, Interstate 95, which runs up and down the East Coast. I-75, which runs from Florida up to Sault Ste. Marie. And then as well as the California Pacific Highway that runs north into Washington and up to Vancouver, that area up there. So our interstate system allows for easy transport and trafficking of firearms. Some of the other challenges that we have, even though the U.S. and Canada have similar justice systems, some of our internal procedures are different. Some of the ways that I'm talking about are like handling informants. We in the United States sort of have a more liberal approach to handling informants. And as you see in some of the old-time movies, we call them snitchers, whatever nickname you want to give half these people. But here in Canada, they treat them with a lot more kid gloves, basically where they're taking on a financial responsibility every time they take on an informant, and they deem them as agents. I sort of equate it to adopting a child. You get all the baggage that you get with a person that's going to be an informant, which means protection of his family and everything else. Some of that stuff we don't have to consider in the United States, but it's a good model to work from within Canada. Another challenge that we just recently faced within the past year is the abolishment of the long gun registry. I know that a lot of the Canadian law enforcement has said it has proven to be some of the not a positive thing when doing firearms investigations, because there's no information left on these guns. They abolished the registration along with the information. So now a lot of the investigations that are done with long guns, they have to turn to the American system to trace their firearms. As Eve said, we're currently working on the connectivity between NIBIN and SIBIN, and we're anticipating that success of that connection soon. The challenges are our own people within the IT community. One of the success stories that I'd like to just briefly talk about was a firearms trafficking investigation called Operation Kentucky Bluegrass. The reason it took that name is because Kentucky was the source state for the firearms that were trafficked up to Canada. We had an individual by the name of Ricardo Tolliver. He was a college-educated individual, but a drug dealer. And he dealt drugs in Kentucky, moved to Toronto, fell again with the wrong crowd, but found an opportunity to smuggle guns. One cold night in March of 2005, he was some of his mules were pulled over in Monroe County, Michigan. Two of the deputies who pulled them over had the foresight to contact ATF because on the search of the car, they found 16 weapons that were secreted in DVD players. All of them had obliterated serial numbers. With that, ATF got involved and then also contacted Ontario Provincial Police, PEW, Provincial Weapon Enforcement Unit, to assist. Tolliver was later picked up on a Part 6 wiretap discussing the sale of a manufactured weapon that he made. And that was the decision to arrest him and take him down. During his questioning by ATF, he admitted to smuggling 500 weapons to Canada. And each time he smuggled one, or his operation smuggled a weapon, he got 1 pound of BC bud marijuana, which he then trafficked back down to Kentucky. That case was pretty prominent up here in Canada because one of the firearms that was used, one of the firearms that was recovered was used during a gang war killing of 8 banditos in southern Ontario, just south of London, Ontario. It hit the news, and luckily we fully investigated the case and discovered the firearm that was used secreted in the wall. Using technology, we were able to recover that firearm and bring it to full use against Tolliver. Long story short, Tolliver was going to be prosecuted on both sides of the border. The Crown attorneys met with the U.S. attorneys and decided that he was going to be better prosecuted furtherly, more time in the United States. He actually pled guilty to 32 years. So it was a big hit for him. Basically, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to bring out is that the investigative information and intelligence sharing that the U.S. has with Canada and Canada has with the United States is second to none. We work cooperatively, especially in this post-9/11 world, where information is everything. And as we've demonstrated up here, is that crime has no borders; that it just goes to wherever the opportunity takes it to. And working together with our partners, we follow it to where it has to go. But I appreciate your time and attention this morning. Thank you.
Questions for Bill? One over here. Question over here.
Thank you very much. You made a reference to the connection between marijuana and guns.
Yes, sir.
And as we know, there are a number of states in the United States that are legalizing or taking steps towards more liberal, shall we say, laws with regard to marijuana. Canada has a bit more of a liberal approach to. I'm misusing that word, but you know
Right.
what I'm getting at.
Freer use.
Freer use, thank you. I'm wondering if you could address what freer use might mean, if there's any connection between, again, marijuana markets and gun markets, and on both sides of the border, and how laws affecting marijuana use and access might impact trafficking in guns, whether there's a correlation, inverse correlation. I'd just like your thoughts on what the connection may be. Thank you.
Thank you. Not only is it just marijuana, but it's also other narcotics as well. Some of the investigations that we have undertaken have been for straight marijuana, marijuana and ecstasy, marijuana, cocaine and ecstasy. We've worked very well with OPP, Toronto, and RCMP on some of our reverse stings, where we've actually traded guns for drugs, but ceased at the point where the guns were going to be transferred. But there is a direct correlation a lot of times, like I tried to express in the one case of Ricardo Tolliver. He was directly dealing with the Toronto Jamaican gangs for this BC Bud marijuana, and every time he saw the opportunity where he could get a pound of BC Bud, I don't know the prices in the States, but is highly sought after because of the purity of it, I heard. Not that I've used it, but it's a one-for-one deal is actually what this was, one gun for 1 pound of marijuana. So there is that same trade route that goes on between drugs and guns. I don't know if I answered your question, but as you said, as you pointed out, some of the states are legalizing marijuana for medical uses, but under federal law, that's a state law. Under federal law, if you go in to buy a gun and you say that you use marijuana, the sale will be denied. So federally, it's still a crime. So, did I muddy the water or answer the question?
Well, I'm wondering what freeing up access to marijuana might do to guns. Do you think it would make the gun market more criminally active, or diminish the incentive for the gun market, or none of the above?
I think the jury's probably still out on that. I would think that for people who didn't hear the question, whether or not freeing up the use of marijuana would increase the amount of guns and that type of stuff. I think the fact is there'll still be a desire for guns by gangs and everybody else. And it's just another commodity that they can trade for guns. So.
Any more questions?
Is this, yeah. So I just wanted to ask, because I know Sibin to Nibin don't have, currently have not had a cold hit yet between the two of us. And I think I realize that sometimes we have a limited amount of requests that we can put in to do to request for NIBIN linkages, correlation requests. And so I know that sometimes because we don't know maybe which of the 12 regions we should submit our request to, that maybe we're missing hits there. So what I'm wondering is, knowing that you've had so many firearms recovered from the U.S. and Canada, has anyone gone back to find out if there has been possibly something in IBIS on the Canadian side that would be the link to those recovered firearms from the United States?
Okay, let me see if I can get your question down. So the guns that are recovered in Canada.
Right. Do we know if they've been used in Canada, or have you always recovered them before they've been used, and so they haven't maybe been input into IBIS on the Canadian side, or submitted for a correlation request to CybIN, so that we haven't had a hit yet between the two of us?
I don't know, Eve. I don't know offhand. I mean, we can probably hopefully get you that answer. But every gun that we trace has been recovered by law enforcement. It is a crime gun. So I guess it would be up to the department that's recovering it, either it be OPP or one in the NWES. So we can possibly pose it to those folks. I'm not sure offhand.
Okay. I actually also have a question for Henrik, but I wasn't sure if now's the time to ask. Yeah? Okay. I just wanted to ask Henrik, because I know that you mentioned that you're going back to reacquire open cases using the 3D technology now. And I think that's something we might have thought about as well as we've switched over to 3D. But I'm wondering, are you just reacquiring bullets, or you're also reacquiring cartridge cases?
We took the consequence, so we're reacquiring everything. The oldest case we reacquired is back to 1967, actually.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is, if we're prioritizing things that we might want to reacquire into TRAX technology, my understanding is that for cartridge cases, the visuals have changed, but the underlying algorithms behind the cartridge case correlations haven't changed. So if you've been reacquiring cartridge cases as well that you've acquired previously in Heritage, have you actually found that there are items that have been missed previously and then you are getting actual hits now?
Yeah, we have found 6 or 7 hits within our open case file, and 3 of them was actually bullets. So the reacquiring with it gave us that possibility due to the new technology. So they were overseen by the old system, actually, or by us, because we were not able to see it on the old technology.
Right, I was expecting the bullets would do better. I just wasn't expecting the cartridge cases to have a difference. I mean, I know the HD 3D will have more correlation categories, but my understanding was that the change from Heritage to TRAX, for cartridge cases at least, was the same correlation algorithms.
We have seen improvements on the cartridge cases as well, because the resolution is double as it was in the old system. So the 4 hits we have on cartridge cases is due to the better resolution, actually.
Oh, okay.
So it was worth the while doing the reacquisition.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. It's for Commissioner Baines. I did not mention this during my presentation, but one of the things we know for a fact in Jamaica is that because of our porous borders, the illegal guns, most of them arrive because they arrive on our coastline and are traded for drugs. I wanted to know, as the current head of the ACCP, what is going to be included in any protocol going forward that will address the gun trade as it relates to the drugs trade. Because now, especially for Jamaica, both of them are linked. Our guns get in because our gangs trade them for drugs. But in discussing the firearms protocol, how do you tackle the drug trade that fuels it?
Well, I'm glad to see ATF are to my right, because they're the principal partner agency we engage with. Last year, I visited both with the director of ATF and the Miami Field Division to lay out the problem we experience in the Caribbean and demonstrate the scale not only of what we're facing, but also the lack of basic infrastructure that would be taken for granted in the US. And I think some of our colleagues were quite shocked about some of our lack of capability and support across the Caribbean. What they've done to begin with is to create a task force, and there's an ATF Miami-Dade task force who have come up with a system where they correlate the basic firearms registration document with the bills of lading shipping orders down at the ports. And what that's allowing them to do is collectively then go and target the shipping routes that are being targeted by criminal groups, so they can identify the one car that's been registered aboard a 200-car ferry taking 200 cars into Haiti, for example, that is loaded with everything you can imagine, and to search that one car because they know that somebody who booked that car onto the ship has been purchasing firearms, and it's leading to some fairly significant successes in taking that forward. The other issue that we've got is obviously establishing e-trace, because what's fairly clear is e-trace, which is a web-based identification, as you know, and for colleagues, a web-based identification run by the ATF, where a recovered weapon is identified, serial number, goes back to our US colleagues, they identify the first point of purchase, and then put literally an investigator to the gun seller, and then they follow it up. Obviously, the longer the delay between the gun being sold at a shop, because there's no other records that follow, and it turning up in Jamaica or Cayman, leads us into a dead end in terms of evidence terms. But that's the first issue they're taking forward. Secondly, ATF had now positioned two specialist support officers, one in Jamaica and one in Trinidad, because whilst there is very clear evidence of where the weapons are coming from the US down, the further you get to the South Americas and Trinidad, and we've got colleagues from Trinidad, their experience is slightly different in that they're getting weapons, some from the US, but their experience is them coming out of South Americas and military weapons grades that are coming through. So the intelligence picture isn't clear. So all of these issues, and certainly RIBIN is intended not just about evidence collation, but to fill those evidence gaps so we can work with the US authorities to stem the close. One other issue we've done is that US Congress published a document that said preventing a crisis of criminality in the Caribbean, which recognized the shift of violence from what's taking place US-Mexican border, and as they close and squeeze that bubble, it's going to come back to the traditional smuggling routes. So what are we doing to collectively work and stem the drugs trade? Interestingly, within their debate, probably for sensitivity reasons, they didn't mention firearms coming south. They talked about criminality and drugs and people smuggling going north. We've engaged with the US in taking that forward and putting firearms and the threat that it's posed. The commitment we've had from the head of ATF, Mr. Jones, is that, and it is accepted across the US, that the Caribbean is their third border priority. After they're about internal security, maintaining security within the US, we feature at number 3 in stemming violence and supporting us to stop criminality, and that includes trying to control weapons better. So there's a lot more to be done, but our challenge is, as I was asked last, do I want to criticize the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms? Well, I know my limitations as a commissioner in the Caribbean. I've seen President Obama seek to restrict long-arm weapons and high-caliber magazines, and I've seen the success he's had. We will push and we will try, but we work collectively with law enforcement to try and stem those one by one, if need be, because one gun kills 5 people. And if we can actually collectively, all of us, do our bit, then we've got a chance of saving some life and starting to reduce the violence that's taking place.
Correction, that's a minimum of 5 persons.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nasser?
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. My question will be in Arabic. سؤالي ليافس، أول شيء شكرا للخبراء على ما قدموه. بالنسبة للتشريعات القانونية، هل يكتفي فقط بالأمور إدارية في أخذ بيانات السلاح من الناس أصحاب الأسلحة أو لابد أن يكون تشريع قانوني بدل من يكون فقط إداري؟
If I can start to answer the question, the experience with legislation across the Caribbean is as different as the nations. If you are caught with an unlicensed firearm in the Caribbean island of Cayman, there is a mandatory 10-year prison sentence. Mandatory 10-year prison sentence. My colleague in the Bahamas, who is suffering severe levels of violence, they had people who'd shot up a police station and the individuals were given 3 months imprisonment. So there's a vast difference. And what we are trying to do is demonstrate the different models of legislation that can start to make a dent in the levels of violence. So I was invited to address the Bahamian people and politicians about how we're dealing with violence and what they may wish to take on and take forward in forms of legislation. Most Caribbean countries have no right to bear arms, with the exception of the US Virgin Islands. The rest of them have a licensed and controlled access to firearms, but it is not stopping the illegal possession of it. So legislation has its part to play, but in some parts it's almost meaningless if there's easy access to weapons coming from other jurisdictions where access to firearms are easily available. That's my perspective, sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're just going to move on to our last panel member, who's Paul James. Paul and I are going to have a question and answer. Paul has a lot of experience, as you know, in the UK, and is working on a number of European programs. Paul, in your experience, could you identify the general challenges you can expect when building a national ballistics program, say from a European perspective?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it fairly general about some broad things. I mean, these things would certainly apply from a European perspective, but I think could equally be applied with any sort of program. I think probably the first thing is actually understanding the problem you're trying to solve. You need to know, and I think underpinning what you're trying to do by thoroughly researching the problem and the solution. Is it the fact that you're getting a slow turnaround on ballistics results? Is it that you're not getting the intelligence picture? Is it that you don't have the processes in place? And once you start to understand that, and the time you invest in doing that is really worthwhile, you need to develop a really strong business case. It needs to be credible. It needs to be operationally and economically viable. And I think building on that, one of the most important things is to gain political support for it. Certainly in the UK with NABIS, we had very strong support from the UK government, from the Home Office, both from a funding and an operational basis, and it was a very key source of funding for us. Another issue that I think you will always have to address is overcoming the natural resistance to change, because a lot of people are in a situation where maybe they've got their own vested interests that maybe not be compatible with the bigger interest. So what you need to do is actually engage with your key stakeholders, work with them, and try and make them understand the benefits that can be achieved. But you're not going to be able to do that unless you've got the evidence from the research in the first place to prove the need for what you're trying to achieve. The other thing is managing the contrasting interests of some of the parties involved. And again, talking about the European perspective, certainly with NABIS in the early days, we had independent forensic service providers who were at that stage doing all the ballistics work, and clearly it was very sensitive to have to work with them, because the fact that we were taking and forming our own laboratories, bringing our own scientists in and taking ownership of this commercially was an issue for them. So the balance we came to is that they still do the bulk of the evidential product while NABIS focuses on the intelligence side of it. But there's other key stakeholders. You need to link in with all the law enforcement agencies and police forces. One of the biggest barriers is always going to be data sharing. And I'll talk in a minute about some potential solutions to that, but data sharing across borders is always going to be an issue, and it's a general challenge you're going to overcome. Probably one of the major things I would always say is that the balance for what you're trying to achieve, any ballistics intelligence program, I think, depends on the accuracy and the speed of the data that you get. You heard Martin Parker talk this morning about the turnaround times for a bullet or a cartridge arriving at a laboratory within 3 hours of that result coming forward. Where problems exist is where you get huge backlogs and so on like this, where you're not able to deal with it because the evidential need overtakes the intelligence need, and you almost get to a point where if it's taking you 6 weeks or longer, as it was in the UK, to deliver these results, those results can be less than useless to investigators in those time period. So really focus on your processes to make sure the intelligence is actually paramount and the fast time intelligence is paramount. And the final general point, I think, is establish a very clear governance model, how it's going to run into the future, how it's going to be supported, and how the programme is governed for the benefits of all the stakeholders.
So based on your experience, could you want to elaborate on some of those recommendations for people?
Yeah, I think when you're trying to do, and I'll answer this from a European perspective, is the very nature of gun crime in different countries means that any system needs to be adaptable, as it's very difficult, if not impossible, to devise any one system that fits all. So when you're looking to work across borders, and you've obviously got legislative issues, you've got jurisdictional issues, you've got practical issues about the type and availability of firearms that are there. If you're trying to work together, the partners need to understand the individual problems. That shouldn't be a barrier, because you can still come up with an effective intelligence system, but understanding what the differences are and understanding the needs of others as well as yourself is really key. I think, I mentioned this earlier, the traditional barriers to data sharing internationally, there's real sensitivities about how much information, particularly when you're talking about intelligence, sharing this across borders, and particularly with personal data. So you need to work towards that, you need to look to solutions to that, because when you're working with other countries, that becomes even more difficult than when you're trying to do it within the confines of your own border. Very obviously, language and cultural barriers on a practical basis, they need to be addressed. Legislation in different countries can pose legal barriers. Existing IT systems and databases. Nobody, in the UK, for instance, there are many, many different databases, many systems up and running. What you need to try and do is you're not reinventing the wheel. You don't need to come to a situation where you're duplicating data entry. If there's existing systems in place, if you can complement those systems and work around them so that you accommodate them, that could be hugely helpful. But it's really interesting because in the UK at the moment, when we're talking about data sharing and the sharing of intelligence, there's a big debate about whether the EU should actually take an option that's available under the Lisbon Treaty to opt out of the being involved from the European Court of Justice around the sharing of intelligence internationally. And it looks as though the UK government is going down the line of opting out it generally and then trying to opt in specific areas. And we're talking things here as fundamental, as basic as European arrest warrants, conviction information, fingerprint data, and vehicle checks. This is stuff that we've moved forward a great deal with over the last few years. These systems are actually benefiting us greatly, and you can see because of the political situation, and it's, you know, in the UK, it's very political about this. Is that how much authority do we want to cede around these issues to Europe, and how much do we want to retain ourselves? And for me, it would be a huge step backwards if you'd actually allow the politics to overtake the really important practicalities of sharing intelligence to save lives.
Any success stories you'd like to share on the ballistics side?
If I talk success stories, I'd be, again, without talking individuals, I think the presentation that we provided yesterday around the linking of those 4 jobs, I can't really come up with a better success story than that. I think you need to build upon that. I think what's actually happened with the system that we've managed to develop is we've been able to understand emerging threats much more quickly. If there's a particular type of new weapon coming into circulation, if there's a new gun factory up and running, these type of things, and the work that we do around inferred firearms, where you're actually able to identify how many active weapons are being used at any one time and which the major threat weapons are, has allowed us to change the investigative mindset of investigators from reactively investigating the crime to actually proactively investigating the weapon and going after the major weapons that are the threats. And the intelligence system that's in place has allowed us to do that in a way that we've never been able to do that before. The speed of notifying the links I've already referred to, that was genuinely 8 to 12 weeks before the establishment of NABIS in the UK, and that is now down in the case of the service level agreement is 24 hours in relation to a homicide or a shooting of that type. And it's also allowed us, and Martin alluded to as well, by building an intelligence cell that actively uses the data you're bringing all the time, making use of it on a daily basis, has allowed us to go to our partner police forces, national agencies, and help to coordinate operational activity, help to bring various investigators together from different crimes, and actually look to work together in a way that, again, wasn't previously possible. And finally, as was said in the presentation yesterday, and we can't take full benefit for this, but certainly in the years since NABIS was established in the UK, gun crime has reduced by 45%. And although the full credit can't go to NABIS, it was certainly, I think, because of the intelligence and the way we're working, smarter was a major contributory factor to that.
Thank you very much, Paul. Any questions for Paul or the rest of the panel members? Anybody?
Voy a hablar en castellano. Comisario César Silguero Lobo, jefe de homicidios de Paraguay. Indudablemente que el sistema IFFS es una herramienta forense muy importante. Nosotros lo hemos adquirido en este presente año. Todavía no tenemos experiencia de resultados positivos. La pregunta mía va en relación a lo siguiente. En Sudamérica hay un índice importante de corrupción en las filas policiales. El sistema IFFS, ¿hay algún tipo de experiencia en relación al control de las armas de fuego utilizadas por las fuerzas de seguridad en relación a este sistema?
If you're talking the question of whether it deals with firearms issued to members of the police forces and the military used in crime, if that's the question, that isn't in the UK a big problem. I know in other places it is, and I'm probably not the best person to comment on this, but I know, for instance, in Jamaica at the moment, there is a body actually looking and focusing on helping IBIS to investigate the level of shootings that are actually happening by members of the police force over there. So, but in the UK, I can say no, but definitely, I mean, one of the things I would say about corruption and the use of IBIS in a database is that, and it was alluded to earlier, you need to be very conscious about how much data you supply broadly to people as well, so that you have got checks and processes in place that can quickly identify any information that's being leaked out. But I can't really comment further. I don't know if David's got more of a view on that around the Jamaican situation.
As well as the IBIS system, in fact, there's an example of it at the back. They have a supplementary software package called Firecycle. And Firecycle can be used as a licensing management control. So when licenses for legitimately held weapons or for military weapons or indeed for police weapons, they're all registered, recorded, serial numbers identified and a ballistic profile attached to each one of those weapons. I think we heard from our colleague in Philippines that they also put legitimately held licensed weapons on there with a ballistic profile. Yesterday we heard of the example where the guy was throwing the Glock gun boxes where there's a shell casing and a warhead. Those are entered onto the system. So the choice is yours as to whether you wish to put law enforcement and military weapons already onto the system so that if one is then used criminally, you are able to identify which arsenal, which unit, which officer that was intended for. So the system is there and it is being used, but it is not universal across the region. Some police forces, some military are using it for that purpose, and it's working very well. Others are not, so the choice is yours.
Just like maybe to add, there are quite a few agencies around the world that are doing that specifically. Hong Kong had an issue with guns being rented out, so they opted to basically test fire every police firearm in Hong Kong. In New South Wales in Australia, they had an issue with some security firearms, so they test fired a lot of the security firearms. In South Africa, they had an issue with missing police firearms. They're test firing all the police firearms. And I believe Augusto in PGR in Mexico, they've done quite a number of firearms in Mexico. So it's proven to be been proven to be a very preventative tool to stop these types of crime. I'm sure that if you talk amongst many of your colleagues, you'll find a lot of very interesting applications where people are doing these things with police, military, security, and personal firearms. Any other questions? No? Well, I'd like to thank our panelists today. You know, they've brought up some very good points. One of the things that Henrik brought up about user groups, we see a lot of user groups around the world, and they've really proven to be very beneficial to harmonize people across countries, across different countries, to get people to do things the same and share experiences is very important. Commissioner Baines talked about centers of excellence in areas where they've got strong expertise, supporting areas where there's limited expertise. If you do it wisely, it actually can become very cost effective in a lot of markets. Your legislators, your politicians, they play such an important role in trying to achieve your goals. ATF does a lot of tracing of firearms. Use them. They have representatives around the world that if you find a firearm that you suspect comes back from an illegal exporter, reach out to ATF. They will help you trace that gun. And there's one of the things I always mention about this conference to people, and when I encourage people to come, is you have a wealth of knowledge and expertise amongst all of you. Use your breakfast, lunch times. You'll find many of the British people in the bar. They can, you know, and they'll all help out, reach out, and you can learn from each other. And I really leverage this time to help build your programs, learn, evolve your programs, and we'll make this world a safer place. So I'd like to thank all the panelists today, and I think it's time for lunch. Thank you very much, everybody.